Here we are. I think we are ready to go.
Sonic reverb.
Excuse me, everyone. I think the sound is better. So let's get started. Welcome to this session.
Close other windows.
Oh, you have to close all your other windows and tabs.
Maybe that was me.
Apologies to everyone. I think we're just getting used to this new technology. I think we're all ready to go. So welcome. My name is Daphne Lamothe, and I am a professor of Africana Studies here at Smith. I'm also a member of Meridians Executive Advisory Board and its Creative Writing Advisory Board. I want to welcome you to this session of Soul Singing and Masala Beyond the Trauma of Displacement. I also want to make a special announcement. So as you all know, this is the 20th anniversary of Meridians. And at 1 p.m., we're going to hold a special 10-minute session to introduce the student interns. So we welcome all of you to log in just for that session so we can acknowledge the great work of the students who work with us on making Meridians. There's also going to be a raffle for Smith students who are on campus and attending the event. So there's a little incentive for you all to come to that session at 1 p.m. as well. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists, Kum-Kum, Bhavnani, and Daphne Brooks. And so I want to tell you a little bit about these amazing women and scholars. Kum-Kum Bhavnani is a professor, a writer, and in the last 15 years has been also a maker of films, a filmmaker who makes research documentaries. She is an awesome example of someone who really refuses to be constrained by disciplinary boundaries and who uses whatever medium is best suited for the message or the argument she's trying to make. Kum-Kum is a distinguished professor of sociology at UC Santa Barbara, where she also chairs the minor in women, culture, and third world development in the Department of Global Studies. And as many of you may know, she was also the inaugural editor of Meridians. Our second panelist, Daphne Brooks, is also a groundbreaker in doing interdisciplinary scholarship and writing for the public sphere. Daphne is the William R. Keenan Jr. Professor of the African American Studies, American Studies, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and Music at Yale University. She's the author of many highly lauded and influential books, including Liner Notes for the Revolution, The Intellectual Life of Black Feminist Sound, which just came out this year and has been met with a bevy of admiring and praise, a bevy of praise and admiration for the great work. It's really a kind of epic exploration of Black women and their influence on American popular music. Daphne's writing centers in general on race, gender, performance, and popular music culture. So today we're going to talk about their two essays. Kum-Kum Bhavnani's essay, Organic Hybridity or Commodification of Hybridity, comments on Mississippi Masala, which was published in Meridians, Volume 1, Number 1 in the year 2000. So it's the 20th anniversary of that essay. And we're also going to talk about Daphne Brooks's essay, All That You Can't Leave Behind, Surrogation and Black Female Soul Singing in the Age of Catastrophe, in which was published in 2008 in Volume 8, Number 1. So I thought we could start by my asking the two of you to just share with the audience what your essay was about. Tell us something about the inspiration that you had for the writing of these works. So let's just start with that question.
Do you want to go first? Okay. Let me start then. The film Mississippi Masala is something that struck me because it describes the trajectory of a South Asian immigrant family coming to the south of the US. And the story is focused on the young woman in the family, played by Sarita Chowdhury, I think. I just have to check that. Yeah, Sarita Chowdhury. And the man who is a carpet cleaner for the motel that the South Asian immigrants run. You know, that is a stereotype, but it's also true, of course. The problem with stereotypes is that with cliches, it's a cliche, and some cliches sometimes have a grain of truth in them. So it's Denzel Washington who does the carpet cleaning. We see a love affair between Sarita Chowdhury and Denzel Washington, a passionate love affair. We see Sarita Chowdhury's relationship to Black groups in the area. She does a lovely dance with the electric slide in the disco that she goes to. And she's not out of step at all. And that's terribly important. So what led to me, that's the story, okay, in a nutshell. But what led me to want to write about this is that in 2000, no one was talking about the possibility of different groups coming together. Now, I say no one, of course we can find examples, but it wasn't thought about. And when I walked the streets in the US, I often saw people of color, but if you like, in our own groups, you know, separate, walking along, having fun, and so on and so forth. I saw that at the university I'm at. Always present, however, in small numbers, but always in own groups. The thing about Mississippi Masala is that it broke with that, and it said something about what happens when people cross identities, if you like. I loved it. I think it's hopeful, it's passionate, it's about desire, it's about, if you like, class, because owners of motels are sort of, I don't know, whatever, but certainly some form of middle class or part of the petty bourgeoisie. And Denzel Washington is much more working class. They meet each other's families with, again, some predicted results, but also Denzel's family, Denzel, as if I know him, Denzel Washington's family embraces her, even though there are some difficulties there. Okay, I wrote this essay. I'm coming back to your question eventually, Daphne. I wrote this essay because it gave me hope. It gave me hope about how people can be together. You see, I think anti-racism, at that time it was called multiculturalism. I have to say, coming from England, there was different understandings. I think that anti-racism is present, and we also have to live it. We do have to live it. And that's not about some of my best friends are. We have to live. So this essay gave me hope for the future. And it was joyful. It was, you know, it wasn't full of music and dancing. I'm not big on, musicals at all, but it gave me hope. And it showed me that passion and desire are essential for any thinking of how we might move forward at the turn of the century.
Mm-hmm.
The essay has a lot of bits from Gramsci and Edward Said and stuff. Actually, when I reread it, I thought, oh, good heavens, did I really write this? But I do like it. I do feel, I still like this essay. Paula, last sentence, Paula said, Giddings said, or someone said yesterday, oh my God, you look at things that you've written in the past and you think, why did I say this? How could I have said this? What was this about, right? And it's true. I see that in the essay. I'm not going to point it out to you. You can find those. But it's not a bad, well, it was there at the turn of the century for suggesting hope.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. Oh, that's really beautiful. I love thinking about Denzel Washington on a Saturday morning. Also love thinking about passion as a kind of grassroots ethical politics that we can hold on to in our lives. Thank you. And thank you, Daphne, my sister Daphne. for moderating this session. I also want to thank Janetta, the entire faculty and staff, the current Meridians family, the conference steering committee for the extraordinary job that they've done, Megan Baptiste, Kyla for heavy lifting and support of keeping us online and surviving here. And then thanks also to the pioneers, to President Ruth Simmons and company for the dream of this journal. Thanks to all of you for creating this gathering space. I too, like Kum-Kum, went back to this essay and was like, well, how am I going to feel about this? The title had always been a shorter title that ended up being published. So for the record, I guess pun intended, All That You Can't Leave Behind, Black Female Soul Singing and the Politics of Surrogation in the Age of Catastrophe. And it originally took shape as a conference presentation that was written in the raw aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. It was delivered at the American Studies Association convention held in Washington, D.C. in 2006, so 1 year after that world tilting disaster. It's an essay about transhistorical dispossession, about displacement, about the disenfranchisement of Black women in America. It turned to specifically focus on two of the most of the moment cultural events from the arc of that year, from 2005 through 2006. So Mary J. Blige's 2005 duet performance with the Irish rock band supergroup U2 on the Shelter from the Storm telethon to benefit survivors of the disaster, and the release in 2006 of Beyonce's second solo album, B-Day. So the ASA session from 06 gave me this opportunity to think about the resonances of those events in relation to pioneering performance studies theorist Joseph Roach's path-breaking theories of surrogation, which he mobilizes in his classic work, Cities of the Dead, Circumatlantic Performances. So those strategies of performance, when Professor Roach was theorizing surrogation, he was referring to those strategies of performance, which he argued, I'm going to quote him specifically, evoke an absence, body something forth, especially something from a distant past, I guess, right? So the work I was doing in both the ASA presentation and the subsequent article was really committed to trying to explore embodied cultural acts that articulate Black women's distinct forms of what I called in the article, palpable sociopolitical loss and grief, as well as spirited dissent and dissonance in sound. And I should mention that I was really thrilled that the essay appeared in a special issue of Meridians in 2008, as Professor Lamothe was just pointing out, that was edited by Professor Janelle Hobson. So that's the kind of ground floor overview of the work itself.
You know, as you were talking, both of you, it calls to mind a question that I have, because both of you in different ways in your essays deal with the ways in which, especially in academia, there's a tendency, or there was a tendency, especially I think in previous decades, to dismiss popular culture, right? And in fact, it's embedded, right, in the title of your essay, Kum-Kum, that you know, when we're talking about Hollywood film or popular music, and specifically pop music, not just popular music, but pop music like Beyonce makes, that, you know, these are commodified forms, that they're co-opted, that they lack a politics or a meaningful politics. So I was wondering if you could talk about that tension and what it means, what it meant for both of you to use those forms, those genres, to carry forth what are quite complex ideas about surrogation or about hybridity in your essays. And I'll let you all decide who wants to go first.
Go for it, Daphne, go for it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I definitely felt like the popular was the place to go to try to think of a rejoinder at the level of scale to the problem of hypervisibility and subjugation that the Katrina disaster presented us with, right? And so my colleague at the time, I was on faculty at Princeton, and Melissa Harris, then Lacewell, now Perry, was my colleague, and she'd just given a talk in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, in which she was theorizing a kind of politics of disenfranchisement specific to Black women that really, took to task the problem of hypervisibility, right? So there was a quote in the piece that I'm pulling up here from Melissa that I had used, and that was really generative to me. She says, quote, "It is on the bodies, lives, and minds of Black women that the story of Hurricane Katrina was written. Their suffering became the conduit through which a conversation on race, class, and vulnerability was initiated. They were literally the bridge over the deadly waters that gave the rest of America a place to cross into the agonizing realization of how unequal the country remained at the dawn of the century," quote unquote. So for me, I was struck by the popular as a place where problems and crises could be worked out at the quotidian level. And it happened for me in real time in watching this performance of Mary J. Blige, her performance of U2's 1991 single One, with the band on live national TV in this pop culture commons space. And I'd never seen anything like that kind of a collaboration before. It was a song that in its original iteration narrated this kind of intimate confrontation between a queer adult child dispossessed by his parents, and addressing the broken covenant, so to speak, between them, the lapsed forms of care, the prodigious need to be seen and recognized by this obtuse patriarch in the context of the lyrical narrative of the song, who's unable to bestow mercy onto his child. So it immediately stood out to me as this kind of striking allegorical performance that captured the historicity of the moment. Black women forgotten by the state in the hypervisible public domain, violently neglected by the state, here manifest in the figure of the queen of hip hop soul, as she's sometimes called, confronting this white patriarchal figurehead embodied in the form of the lead singer Bono. So I remember crying in real time while watching that performance. And I held on to that feeling while writing this piece, but I also wanted to kind of capture what it means to be affectively hailed by popular forums. And then I was also really interested in the promise of Beyonce way back in '06 and even before that. I was curious about the ways that New Orleans figured in her visual repertoire at that point in her career, in the album art for B-Day, and also the accompanying videos, right? So again, circulating in the popular, these kind of cultural memories of New Orleans. Her complicated relationship to racial capitalism, her passionate promotion of Black women's entrepreneurial practices bequeathed to her by her parents, and the kinds of questions about Black women's property and ownership and social autonomy that she was working through in her music. So again, it was a form, a commodified form that nonetheless is producing knowledges and questions and problems about dispossession and displacement with regards to Blige's performance, and the hyper-material worth and value of Black women in Beyonce's work. So popular music, for me has always been a site to think about the serious ways that Black women's knowledge production, so public knowledge production that circulates in the everyday and manifests a kind of affective vitality that moves, that takes shape, that dynamically transmogrifies and dialectical play between performer and passionate audience members, right? That's always resonated for me. It's antiphonal, it reverberates in the popular universe. It's something that we make together. So that's why I always value theorizing the popular.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me go. Thank you, Daphne. My goodness.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Okay, so I've said that the film I was looking at is Mississippi Masala, and I can say more about it, but I've said that. Why I wanted to write about it is because, as I said, because it gave us hope. But, there were criticisms of the film. There were feelings that it merely exacerbated stereotypes, that it suggested, these are what different critics have said. Bell Hooks said, along with Anuradha Dingwani, that, for example, perhaps the film suggests that people can only come together through romantic love and doesn't look critically at power. Another criticism was, and the third type of criticism is that there were discussions about race, about racism really in the film. I dispute all of those. I believe, not I believe, I know that the film, I'm just looking at the notes that I had made. I know we're not supposed to. I believe that, as Daphne said, the quotidian level of our existence is very important. I've lived, the words aren't chosen well. The lived experience of people is how I feel we understand deeply in our bodies what, in this case, race and gender and class, and nationality, how they come together. So it is that is the central idea in my in the piece, which is to look at exactly. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm saying exactly the same as you, Daphne, but it was that popular texts are a way to understand what is going on in the world. Now, Mira Nair, who made the film on a low budget, $7 million or something, in whenever it was, well over 2 decades ago, she's clearly not a film director like, and there are many of them that we could cite, but I'm afraid I don't watch those films anymore, so the ones I'd cite would be like her. She has some understanding of migration, what happened in Uganda, and then coming to the US. Of course, the South Asian diaspora means if we're here, we also know lots of people in England and so on, wherever we choose. So I feel that she, as a director, really understands something. I like this film the most of all of her films, all of them, including A Suitable Boy, because it has some politics in it. There are discussions, and I don't think they're staged. They're not didactic. When the lovers are discovered in the Biloxi motel, I mean, Sunita Chowdhury's, I'm sorry, I've forgotten her stage name, family, I mean, they're awful, right? They're awful. But she talks them through it because there is a desire in people like them to not be racist, right? They want not to be racist, but they are, and they are totally embedded in their class position. And she talks them through it. And Denzel Washington's family has a different relationship to her and who they are, much more positive. And I think that's great because at that time, people were often saying, well, of course, if you hang out with African-American people, they don't like, it's not liked and so on and so forth. Rubbish. So I liked how she presented the South Asians as really awful, but able to move. Her father was able to move, certainly, and the mother perhaps, and forget all those cousins. And how African Americans, the family of Denzel, just embraced her. This is important to me because it undermines, again, I hope, some of the ideas about how people relate to each other. Again, seeing it expressed at the everyday level, at the lived experience level, allows us to see the differences and commonalities. For the last session, for example, I quoted, I just threw into the chat or a question, I can't remember where, it was meant to be the chat, a poet that they had in their archives, Suhair Hamad, who her last paragraph, her last verse of her poetry talks about there is no difference in the USA. There is no difference between Indians and Sikhs and Bangladeshis and Muslims, blah, 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 right? I mean, not blah, blah, the poetry is too good for me to paraphrase here. And that's what this talks about. I have always argued that difference is critical, that we focus on it, but we also, in our writings, think harder about how difference is transmogrified into loving relationships, not just tolerance. I hate tolerance, the word of that, the idea of that word. Respect is okay, but it's distance, but just love. It's just about love, and shows it's possible. Not that it's the way to do it, the only way to do it, but love makes such things possible.
You know, as I'm listening to you both, originally I thought to ask you about the explicit theoretical moves that you make in each of your essays. So in your case, Kum-Kum, it's about the idea of organic hybridity, and for Daphne, it's surrogation. And I think you've both talked a little bit about these concepts in your recollection of what the essays were about that you shared with us earlier. But as we're talking, I'm just thinking about the ways in which all of these kind of affective modes are part of our discussion from the very beginning: love, passion, hope, despair, desire. And so I guess I'm wondering if you realized at the time that that was an intervention, and perhaps even a feminist intervention that you are making in those essays, or if that's something that comes to the foreground now that you're looking at them in retrospect.
Well, I feel like the work that I do with Black Women in Sound, I've always said, builds on, a tradition of intellectual Black feminist interrogations of popular music culture across the century. And we know those iconic voices, everyone from Angela Davis to Hazel Carby to Farrah Griffin, Gail Wald, who's done incredible work in this field. Mm-hmm. And so the kinds of, and even, the other Daphne, Daphne Duval Harrison, right? So there's a real legacy of feminist scholarship on Black women's sounds that especially is looking at kind of the ways that sonic performances can translate and intervene in the crisis of despair, which of course is central to blues theory. I mean, Ralph Ellison has given us theories with regards to how to think about the blues and fingering the jagged grain of the blues. So I felt like I was building on that tradition and also trying to lean into the ways that we needed to understand, or really to care for and to value the popular forms in our immediate midst that were doing that tradition, that line of work in the tradition around grappling with despair and finding something, if not triumphalist, then, world altering that can lead to different kinds of futures.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I have always, well, not always, of course, but by the mid-1980s or the early 1980s, I had been writing about racism in white feminist thought. Let me just call it that at the moment. I was very active politically. The introduction to my essay talks about the political activism that I wanted to be part of in the UK. And I say that not as a badge of credibility, but to say from that activism, I started to write. That was how I really came into writing. That activism was about feminism. I mean, we don't need to go into the details of the 70s and 80s in England, but it was nasty. So I just feel, and people will disagree with me, I feel that feminism is at the core of my identity. Here in this film, Meena is, she is what I say, a free-thinking woman. And I like to think that perhaps I was like that. I was on some television program in the late 70s in England about arranged marriages. I'd spoken out against them, but I had also argued that they weren't necessarily the brutal relationships that it was thought they were. So I'm on this. I wear a sari. In those days, you could smoke, and I did smoke, and I smoked, you could smoke on television. So I was smoking cigarettes. The panel was sort of mostly South Asian men. And my friends said that when the camera focused on one of them, they knew I was there because they could see the puffs of smoke coming from me from across the panel. I like to think I was a free-thinking woman. Yes, I was very brave to smoke on screen. I did it deliberately, but I wore the sari also as a deliberate act. Okay, how is this related to feminism? It's not related to feminism in terms of how we change the world, but it is related in terms of saying we can suggest other ways of being. That's all. No one may see them. It doesn't matter. It helps us. So, for example, when what I like about this film and what I think is feminist about the film is that whiteness is not at the core. See, feminism, I don't need to tell anyone. I mean, I wanted to be in Meridians. I was so excited that I wrote this essay properly rather than just bits of thoughts because I wanted to be in the journal, and luckily I was published in the journal. So whiteness is not at the core. That is what feminism is about. Yes, of course, gender identity and all that is related to that, sexualities, trans, intersex, celibacy, all of that is related. I'm not saying that. But we often forget that not centering whiteness could be, should be, if I'm a little moralistic about it, at the core of feminisms. So that's what I liked about the film. And when Meena is introduced to the family, when Denzel Washington, she goes to a barbecue of the family, he says, this is Meena. She's from England, India, Africa, anywhere else? And the father says, Denzel Washington's father says, how come they got Indians in Africa? The British brought them there to build the railways. Like slaves? Yes, that's how my grandfather came. Now, yes, it's superficial, but also we don't make these we didn't make these connections often enough. So it's those interconnections that lie at the heart of feminism, feminist thinking, feminist practices. And those are also located in individual practices. George Floyd's murder led to something that's quite heartening, perhaps, the ways in which all sorts of people came out against it, all sorts. And that's important because that has had such an impact on the prevailing discourses. So that's important. But as I say, how we live our lives is also important, perhaps for us, for our own subconscious, for our own subjectivities.
Mm-hmm. We actually have a question from someone in the audience that I think gets at this question of politics and affects and the relationship between the two in a different way. So I want to pose it. This is from Shobha Sharad Regopal, who asked, could you, Kum-Kum, discuss further the film further in connection to issues in India today and the love jihad of the current administration? So this love jihad, which is the basis on which people are being lynched in India today. It's a very different way from that we're talking about affect and ethical possibility. So
right. Happy to, and I hope, Daphne, you'll also comment on this. For many reasons, but particularly because of your wonderful work. Of course, love jihad it's just nonsense. But what Modi has done, Modi is a fascist. We know that, and we know how fascism operates by getting people involved. Not that people have no agency, but the fears that we all have can be translated into this hatred and fear. Remember Homi Baba, well, I'm remembering to myself, I'm saying this. Homi Baba said that what we fear, we also desire. So, so love jihad captures all of that, right? So Modi knows that love is important. And what he has done here is present ways for people to lynch others. We know, I mean, I know about that, the citizens' bill that was discussed briefly in the previous session. So love, it is a way for mobilizing people. I think whoever on the left, not just progressives, but on the left, those of us who identify like that, that's the we I'm referring to, have to take responsibility for working with the idea of love and talking about this love jihad, which is just disgusting. But Modi is so effing clever that he has got to the heart of what it is. He's got the love and what you fear and desire, right? And he's put them together in this most disgusting way. And we should counter it. We should counter it with not hate, to my mind. I'm sorry to say I do hate some people, but I try not to say that word, and Modi is one of them. But to counter it with forms of love, including sexual love. If you love jihad, well, do you sleep with Muslims? I don't know. I mean, that's really pathetic, but Daphne.
Well, thank you, Kum-Kum. I mean, I guess, from the standpoint of popular music culture, which, I've been referring to today in relation to this piece, I think a really powerful example of agape, so Martin Luther King drawing on these broader global philosophies within theology about forms of love that speak to the idea of loving outside of your own interest. An incredible example of this is Rihanna, who actually spoke out very famously about Modi's, subjugation of the farmers and exploitation of farmers in India. And it was a move that was seen as startling and shocking by some African-American fans who were trying to figure out, why should we care about Indian farmers, living under fascism? And it was met with, approval. Kum-Kum, you can probably speak more to this, but from what I heard from, the resistant masses who were paying attention to her in India, such that I saw on Trevor Noah that, there were kids in India with big old posters of Rihanna, which they maybe had beforehand anyways. But, she was transformed in that moment into this kind of iconic pop figure who was executing kind of ethics of love and, global solidarity, which we absolutely need to be thinking of much more strategically. We always did, but especially in this moment and in the context of the pandemic, now more than ever. So that's such a great example of what a pop musician can do in the social media platform to think ethically about these kinds of matters.
And riffing off that, Daphne, I think I don't know, all these words are all wrong because I'm not thinking straight, but I wish that more celebrities would actually speak out about this against the idea of love jihad. I really do, because it has a resonance that is critical. And they're not afraid to speak out here in the US. Why not take it a little bit further? I want to say one other thing about music, which is that my nephew, Arun Ghosh, who lives in England, is a jazz clarinetist. And, he's doing okay. He plays with people like Nitin Soni. Anyway, he's doing okay, right? So his band is made up of all sorts of people. And Arun Ghosh is a South Asian Indian. He talks about his roots, conceived in India, born in London, living in Manchester, sort of thing. And that's again, finally, I say this, a South Asian is embracing jazz. Perhaps other people can
Vijay Iyer,
Bollywood music.
Vijay Iyer is a really
Vijay Iyer,
right, and his own sense of agape and solidarity with Black radical tradition thought is so powerful. So.
It's actually, you're absolutely right, and the thing about Martin Luther King that you said is fantastic as well. I hope that we can get it into the chat or somewhere so that we can all look it up, the idea of loving outside your own interest. So just to say, that's it, period. I just wish more famous people would do what Rihanna did. I always was a little skeptical about her makeup for different skin shades, I've forgotten what it's called. Although I thought it was great and she, publicized it well. I love it. I'm going to only buy that. Anyway, if I use makeup.
I have one more question, but I do want to say for both of you that reading your essays, they both made me go back to the text that you were writing about. I had seen Mississippi Masala way back in the day when it came out, and so and I think it's a great film. But I just went back to both, and I found that the YouTube of the performance of Mary J. Blige and U2, and then ended up. Oops, excuse me. I'm so excited. I knocked my computer over. And then with Beyonce, you know how that loop can go on and on and on.
It can.
Yeah. But what I loved about your essays and then about this conversation is the idea of resonance, and that you need that part of what you model for us is listening and reading as a practice. And it's easy to see what's at the kind of first level of resonance, but you have to really kind of sit with the text in order to see the other wavelengths on which it might be resonating. And so I just think it's really inspiring for me, and a really good reminder of how important it is to sit and see and think and listen beyond what we can easily perceive, right? So as a practice, I think both essays really kind of exemplify that. And so in the time that we have, I want to make this a little shift to ask if you could reflect for us, or think about if you haven't done so already, about why Meridians, why I mean, Kum-Kum, in a way, there's a kind of obvious, you were the inaugural editor, but what was
they
it?
heard about me after that essay, by the way.
Really?
I suspect. Anyway, go for it. Daphne.
Okay, so what was it about Meridians that seemed like it was the home? It should be the home for the pieces that you were working on and the ideas you were working through at that moment in time.
Daphne.
Well, I'll say first to your last point, Daphne, thank you so much for that. And I would want to reference the work of Alexandra Vasquez, incredible Latinx sound studies scholar who's talked a lot about what it means to live with music and to return to music again and again and again. I mean, her work is so lyrical and always embedded in her work as this kind of recognition that she utilizes in her feminist pedagogy as well, saying to her students, you have to live for a long time with this material. And we know this. I mean, all of us know this in our work, and teaching Toni Morrison again and again and again. I am extrapolating ideas from her work now that I hadn't done before, and that I know I'll continue to do so in the future. And with regards to Meridians, I mean, I was so excited, obviously, about the emergence of such a journal at all. And I want to again reference the fact that Professor Janelle Hobson was putting together, she put out a call for a special issue entitled Representing Women, Hip Hop and Popular Music Culture. She was the guest editor. It's from 2008. And I was thrilled because There weren't many scholarly outlets, even at that point, even in the early aughts, that was devoting entire journal conversations to Black women in popular music culture. So shout out to Janelle for doing that work, and it seemed like the obvious place where I would want to house my work.
And for the young folks in the audience, it might seem like not a really radical intervention, but it was. We got our degree in English around the same time. And if you were talking about Black music and popular culture or writing about it, it was about blues or
right. That's right.
Yes, right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There are only a few figures at that point. Of course, Trisha Rose. We want to give all praise to the great Trisha Rose for being the first scholar to publish a full-length volume on hip hop. Amani Perry's Prophets of the Hood, but it was still new terrain. So again, it was such a great opportunity, and I was so honored to be a part of it.
I can say more, and I probably will in the final session, but about this, I just think it's open. We do have to sit with it. We have to talk about it. And that's what I'm missing because of COVID, that, being able to see films with people and then have a laugh and a drink and an argument about it, plays, etc., music, etc. But, it opened the way. Daphne, your work, and everyone else you mentioned, I am not dissing them, I hope. But Marta Gonzalez, in her book, I've forgotten it, Caminos y Canciones, she says, the first line of an article she wrote is, musical education begins in the home. And I would change that to, musical education begins in wherever we think of home, because so many people have so many different ideas of and experiences of living elsewhere. So what I want to say with this final thing is that, it's Daphne and all the people who went before me, but it's the work of Daphne, of Trisha Rose, of that inspired me to think that maybe popular culture offers a way into lived experience. I'd much rather write about music, by the way, but I know nothing. I'm the critic who looks at a picture and says, "Oh, I just like it." It's like, "Oh, I just like it." I don't know that much.
Please go ahead. Finish.
That's it. Period.
Okay. Since we started 2 or 3 minutes after, I hope folks will indulge if we just go another minute or two over, because there's a really great question in the ask a question box that I really want to, I think would be a really wonderful way to end. And so the question is about how I'm going to kind of truncate it a little bit, abridge it. So how pertinent is it to have similar affective experiences to form cross-border solidarities? The question is kind of premised on the idea that in the film, right, Mina and Demetrius, the two main characters, are kind of share, in a sense, this experience of exile, although experienced very differently. So is that crucial in solidarity building? So let me just ask the question.
I'm going to ask if Daphne will talk about that in terms of Rihanna, because I don't know. Rihanna and what she did for the farmers, Do you think that, Daphne? What do you know? I mean, what do you know from your readings?
Well, I'm not sure I can speak extensively on that. But in terms of are we talking about the specificity of difference with regards to how she identified?
Yeah, and let me say a bit more then. I was trying to be mindful of time, but there's a little note that we can go a little bit over. So the question was really about solidarity building with across difference, as you said, and specifically, what are your thoughts on cross-racial solidarities with privileged white activists in anti-racist solidarity work? So that's not precisely what you're talking about in the example of Rihanna, but the question, right, is of like different levels and access to privilege. And so solidarity work within that context as opposed to kind of more.
Well, I mean, I will go to the place of my latest book where I tried to really excavate these examples of white feminists who were doing the work around thinking about the radical politics and poetics of Black women's sounds, but not as a way in which to affectively dominate and consume the music, but to shed light on the agency and autonomy of the creatives producing the music themselves. And so my answer is maybe a little bit off the charts here, but I think that maybe it brings us back to the ways that we produce knowledges that operate as extensions of accomplice work. If we could produce knowledges that are, identifying the full humanity and subjectivity of the artist in question, if it's cultural studies work that we're doing, then that's a kind of shared project. And it's what I really tried to do in my latest work. So that's maybe what I would want to leave people thinking about.
It's not just trying to do, you did it. If I could just say a couple of things, despite time. One is that when I decided I was going to make a documentary, long story, idiotic, but I did it, and now I love making films. I deliberately, it was because of my class, I deliberately wanted to go to different continents and talk with different people. So I had women from Senegal talking about getting rid of FGM. I had Brazilian women talking about rubber tapping and saving the forest. Women in Black and the racism within women in Black and women in South Asia. So I think that is important. And this is a cliche, so, we can't end with this, but I'm going to say it. Pastor Niemoller is well known for his words. And he says, when talking about the fascism in Germany in the late 30s, early 40s, he says, first they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unions and I did not speak out. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. We could think about Palestine in that context. Then they came for me. And there was no one left to speak for me. I'm sorry he put that line in, because I think it's very important to do this cross-border solidarity, not to look out for ourselves, but because that's the way we build solidarities. And we assume that someone will look out for us. I say that in my classes, but I don't know if anyone believes it, but that's what I think.
Yeah, so smart, so much intelligence in this room, in this virtual room, like that we're really talking not about shared affect or shared experience, but a shared project that is motivated. Motivated by this politics, right? I'm sorry, an ethical and affective possibility that we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Daphne, Lamothe.
Yes.
Can you say a minute or two about your work and how that fits into this?
Oh, no.
Yes, please.
Yes.
You had time to think about what you were going to say.
Time,
so I'm gonna take a step back for right now, because I'm so overwhelmed by the insights that you've shared with us.
Well, we should just remind audiences that your work has been path-breaking with regards to thinking about ethnography and racial formations and intersectionality, particularly during the Harlem Renaissance era, but the long 20th century. So we're doing the work together.
Yeah. Ethical possibility and aesthetic possibility. I'll say that my work right now is really interested in aesthetic possibility, and I think it shares a lot. It's one of the reasons that I'm really inspired by the conversation. So I want to thank you both so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and going back and moving us forward in this conversation. I want to invite folks to stick around for our 10-minute recognition of the student interns that will take place at 1 p.m. and for the rest of the symposium, which has been really just inspiring and insightful and delightful. So, thank you both, Daphne Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you, Daphne.
Bye.
Thank you.